Welcome to Neurovale, a threshold into unmasked psychology and philosophy. The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Carl Jung. When we talk about failure, we usually imagine that life is blocking our path. We blame circumstances, other people, or bad timing, but in reality, much of what we call failure is something we quietly build ourselves. Jung understood this very well. He believed that the unconscious mind often works against our conscious goals. What you think of as failure is often not failure at all. It is self-sabotage. Self-sabotage is not random. It is a pattern created by fear, unresolved conflicts, and unexamined beliefs. You may tell yourself you want success, yet part of you resists it. You procrastinate on important work. You walk away from opportunities, or you repeat choices that guarantee disappointment. This is not because you are weak. It is because there are forces within you that are stronger than your conscious intention. Psychologists know that humans are deeply influenced by unconscious drives. Your past experiences, your sense of worth, and the roles you were forced to play in childhood all shape how much success you allow yourself to have. Sometimes the unconscious mind clings to struggle because struggle feels safer than change. So when you think you are failing, the truth may be more unsettling. You are not falling short by accident. You are pulling yourself down on purpose, though not always knowingly. Jung would argue that until you face this truth, you will continue to live under the weight of sabotage that you mistake for fate. Stick with me, let's explore deeper. Number 1. Self-sabotage is disguised loyalty. One of the most unsettling truths about self-sabotage is that it is rarely about weakness or laziness. More often, it is about loyalty. At first, that may sound strange. Loyalty is usually seen as a virtue. Yet in the unconscious mind, loyalty can keep a person chained to identities, family patterns, and invisible promises made long ago. Think about a child who grows up in a home where success is criticized. Perhaps the father constantly says, "People with money are arrogant," or the mother quietly warns, "Do not try to stand out, it only brings jealousy." That child learns that thriving comes with danger. Years later, as an adult, every time they get close to a breakthrough, they pull back. They procrastinate, they doubt themselves, or they make choices that lead to failure. Why? Because unconsciously, they are staying loyal to the family script. They are protecting the beliefs of those they loved, even if it costs them their future. Carl Jung taught that what remains unconscious rules our lives until we confront it. This hidden loyalty is a perfect example. You may think you are free, but deep down you are serving the ghosts of your past. You are saying, "If I succeed, I betray where I came from. If I fail, I remain connected." It is a loyalty to pain, to smallness, to an identity that no longer fits. Philosophers have long warned about the weight of inherited identity. Nietzsche spoke of the danger of living someone else's morality instead of creating your own. In psychology, this is the same as repeating patterns that are not truly yours. To break free, you must ask yourself, who am I loyal to when I hold myself back? Whose approval am I protecting by not becoming who I could be? The brutal truth is this: many people sabotage not because they cannot win, but because winning feels like betrayal. To heal, you do not need more motivation. You need the courage to see where your loyalties lie. Only then can you choose whether those loyalties deserve your obedience or your release. Number 2, you protect your wounds more than your potential. One of the strangest things about human behavior is that we often guard our pain more fiercely than we guard our future. It sounds irrational, but the unconscious mind does not measure reality in logic. It measures it in survival. When you have been hurt, abandoned, shamed, or dismissed in the past, those wounds become part of your identity. They shape how you see yourself. Over time, they even become familiar territory. And the mind loves the familiar, even if it is destroying you. That is why many people unconsciously protect their wounds. They defend them like treasures. They rehearse the same old stories of betrayal and injustice because those stories feel safe. But here is the brutal truth. Protecting your wounds often means abandoning your potential. Why? Because success is not just about achieving something external. Success forces you to change your inner map. It demands that you step into an identity that is bigger than your pain. And that terrifies the unconscious mind. Imagine a person who grew up believing they were unworthy of love. They carry that wound into adulthood. Now, if someone offers them genuine affection, they panic. Instead of receiving it, they sabotage the relationship. They pick fights, withdraw, or push the person away. Why? Because accepting love would mean rewriting the script they have rehearsed for years. It would mean letting go of the wound that has defined them. The wound is painful, but it is predictable. The love is new, and therefore frightening. Philosophically, this is what Kierkegaard meant when he spoke about the despair of refusing to become oneself. Psychology echoes this. Trauma researchers show that people often unconsciously recreate familiar pain rather than embrace unfamiliar healing. It is not that they want to suffer, it is that they do not yet know who they are without the wound. This is why self-sabotage is so powerful. Every time you approach your potential, you feel the silent terror of losing the identity your wounds gave you. To embrace growth, you must release the comfort of pain. Jung would say this is the moment when the shadow must be faced. The wound must no longer be your shield. The question is simple but life-changing. Do you want to keep protecting your scars, or do you want to become someone beyond them? Number 3. Failure is safer than growth. Most people imagine that failure is what they fear. But if you look closely, you will see that what terrifies the unconscious mind even more is growth. Failure, for all its sting, can feel safe. Growth, on the other hand, exposes you. It demands that you step out of hiding. Think about it. When you fail, you get to remain invisible. No one expects much from you. There is no pressure. You can stay in the shadows where there is comfort in being underestimated. But if you succeed, the story changes. Expectations rise. People start to watch you. You carry weight on your shoulders. That visibility can feel unbearable, especially if you have spent years protecting yourself from being truly seen. Imagine a talented musician who plays beautifully at home but never performs on stage. They tell themselves it is fear of failure that holds them back. In truth, what terrifies them is the idea of being recognized, of people looking at them with admiration, of having to live up to that image again and again. Failure lets them hide. Growth would expose them. Psychology explains this as the fear of individuation. Jung believed that becoming who you truly are means stepping out of the collective shadows and claiming your unique place in the world. That kind of growth feels like a threat because it requires you to separate from the safety of the group. Philosophy echoes this. Kierkegaard described the anxiety of possibility, the unsettling feeling that comes when you realize you could actually become something extraordinary. That possibility feels heavier than failure itself. Failure offers you an excuse. Growth removes all excuses. Once you succeed, you can no longer say, "I did not try." You now carry the burden of sustaining success, of being responsible for what comes next. Many people unconsciously prefer the safety of staying small. So here is the paradox. Failure is not the enemy. Growth is. Because growth will demand that you rise into the light, that you face responsibility, that you allow yourself to be truly seen. The question is whether you are ready to choose the danger of growth over the safety of staying invisible. Number 4. The shadow resists exposure. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a shadow. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is the part of you that you push away, the traits, memories, and desires that you decide are unacceptable. You lock them in the basement of your mind and pretend they do not exist. But here is the unsettling truth. The shadow does not disappear. It waits. And when you begin to rise towards success or wholeness, the shadow pushes back. Why? Because exposure threatens it. To succeed means to shine, and light always reveals what is hiding in the dark. The shadow does not want to be revealed. It prefers to remain unexamined because it knows that once you see it clearly, you can no longer deny it. Think of someone who constantly undermines their own opportunities. On the surface, they say they want success. But each time they get close, they pull back. They arrive late, they avoid responsibility, or they lose focus at the very moment things could advance. The reason is not laziness. The shadow in them carries a story, maybe a deep belief that they are unworthy, or a buried fear of being ridiculed, or even anger at the thought of leaving others behind. That hidden material does not want to be brought into the open. Sabotage becomes its way of staying concealed. Jung taught that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. In philosophy, Plato's allegory of the cave illustrates a similar truth. People resist leaving the cave of shadows because stepping into the light is painful. It is easier to sit with illusions than confront raw reality. Your shadow resists exposure because exposure forces transformation. Once you see the part of yourself that manipulates, envies, or fears, you cannot unsee it, and then the responsibility falls on you to integrate it. Many people would rather sabotage their own rise than take on that responsibility. The paradox is this: the very success you want is chained to the shadow you avoid. To rise, you must let the light reveal what is hiding in you. The shadow resists, but growth requires its unveiling. Number 5. Your unconscious may fear freedom more than chains. It sounds strange, but many people secretly fear freedom more than they fear imprisonment. At first glance, this makes no sense. Who would not want to be free? But the unconscious mind is not logical. It clings to what is familiar, even if that familiarity is painful. Chains, whether they are emotional patterns, toxic relationships, or limiting beliefs, offer predictability. Prison may be uncomfortable, but it is structured. You know its walls. You know its rules. Freedom, on the other hand, is uncertain. It has no clear map. To be free means to carry responsibility for your choices. And responsibility is far heavier than chains. Imagine someone who stays in a dead-end job for years. They complain constantly about how unhappy they are, but when offered an opportunity to leave, they find excuses. It is not the right time, or what if I fail somewhere else? Deep down, they are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of freedom. In their current job, they are chained but secure. Outside, they would have to face the unknown, to define themselves in a way that carries real risk. Philosophers have long recognized this truth. Erich Fromm, in his book Escape from Freedom, argued that people often run away from freedom because it overwhelms them. With freedom comes the weight of choice, and with choice comes the possibility of regret. Many prefer the false safety of chains over the dizzying openness of possibility. Psychology confirms this. Trauma survivors, for instance, often recreate restrictive environments because freedom feels unsafe. Their nervous system has been wired to expect pain, so even when freedom appears, they retreat to what they know. This is the hidden root of much self-sabotage. The unconscious whispers, "Better the prison I know than the freedom I cannot control." It tricks you into believing that safety lies in limitation. But in truth, limitation is only survival, not life. The real challenge is not breaking free of chains, but learning to bear the weight of freedom. Success demands it. Growth demands it. To embrace freedom means to step into the uncertainty of becoming fully yourself. Number 6. You secretly rehearse rejection. Rejection is one of the deepest human fears. From early childhood, we crave belonging. To be excluded, abandoned, or dismissed feels like a wound to our very existence. Because of this, many people create a strange survival strategy. They rehearse rejection in advance. On the surface, it looks like procrastination, underachievement, or avoidance. But underneath, it is preparation. If you reject yourself before others can, the eventual pain feels less severe. Imagine a student who is brilliant but never submits their work on time. They tell themselves they are lazy, but what is really happening is deeper. If they hand in the assignment and it is judged harshly, the rejection will cut into their sense of worth. By sabotaging the process, they gain control. If failure comes, they can say, "I did not really try." This way, they rehearse rejection on their own terms rather than risk the raw pain of being rejected by someone else. Carl Jung pointed out that what we fear most, we often unconsciously create. By rehearsing rejection, you end up living inside it. The very thing you were trying to soften becomes your reality. You do not escape rejection. You simply reject yourself first, which is far more brutal. Philosophy also speaks to this. Jean-Paul Sartre described how humans often flee from freedom into self-deception. Self-sabotage is one form of this flight. By undermining yourself, you avoid the uncertainty of another person's judgment, but at the cost of your own possibility. Psychologists call this self-handicapping. It is a way of protecting self-esteem by ensuring that failure can be explained by lack of effort rather than lack of ability. But here lies the tragedy. The more you protect yourself this way, the more you train your mind to expect rejection as the norm. You stop giving yourself the chance to be fully accepted. The painful truth is that rehearsing rejection does not make you stronger. It only ensures you experience the very rejection you fear. Every time you sabotage yourself, you practice exclusion until exclusion feels like home. The challenge is to stop rehearsing pain and allow space for the possibility of acceptance. Without risk, there can be no belonging. Number 7. Your sabotage is a mirror of contempt. Self-sabotage is not just about fear. Sometimes it is about contempt. The way you treat yourself when no one is watching reflects what you really believe you deserve. If, deep down, you feel unworthy, your actions will unconsciously confirm that belief. You will create situations that make your low opinion of yourself appear true. Think about someone who constantly enters relationships with people who mistreat them. On the surface, they say they want love and respect. Yet time after time, they choose partners who dismiss them, cheat, or emotionally neglect them. Why? Because deep within, they carry contempt for themselves. They do not believe they deserve better, so they unconsciously arrange their life to reflect that inner judgment. Carl Jung warned that the psyche will always push us to live out what is hidden inside. If you secretly believe you are unworthy, life begins to take the shape of that belief. Your sabotage is not random. It is a mirror. It shows you the contempt you carry for yourself. Philosophically, this echoes the ancient idea that the outer world mirrors the inner one. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts are soaked in contempt, your actions will produce contemptuous results. Psychology gives this a name: confirmation bias. Human beings unconsciously seek evidence for what they already believe. If you see yourself as unworthy, you will unconsciously steer toward rejection, criticism, and failure. Every sabotaged opportunity, every abandoned project, every broken connection becomes another piece of evidence that you were right about yourself all along. But here is the brutal truth. The contempt is not reality. It is a story planted long ago, often in childhood. Perhaps you were compared, shamed, or ignored until you internalized the message that you were less than others. Now, as an adult, you replay the same script, proving it true over and over. The way out is not to chase success while ignoring the contempt. The way out is to confront it directly, to see how much of your sabotage is really self-directed hostility. Jung would argue that until you integrate this part of yourself, it will continue to run the show from the shadows. Every act of sabotage whispers one thing: this is what I think I deserve. The question is, will you keep believing that story? Number 8. You mistake suffering for depth. There is a hidden romance people have with suffering. Many unconsciously believe that struggle equals meaning, that only through pain does life become significant. This is why peace can feel suspicious or even shallow. The moment calm arrives, some people unconsciously stir up chaos again. To them, chaos is proof that life is real. Think about someone who finally enters a healthy relationship after years of toxic ones. At first, the calmness feels good, but soon they feel restless. They pick unnecessary fights, create drama, or even walk away. Why? Because part of them believes that love without struggle is not love at all. The absence of suffering feels empty. They mistake the storm for depth. Psychology calls this repetition compulsion. Trauma survivors often repeat patterns of pain because pain is familiar, and familiarity feels like safety. Even if suffering is destructive, it feels alive. In contrast, peace can feel like numbness. So the unconscious sabotages stability in order to resurrect struggle. Philosophy speaks to this as well. Nietzsche said, "Man, in his pride, created suffering in order to feel profound." There is a dangerous temptation to glorify struggle as the source of depth. Yet true depth does not require chaos. It requires presence and awareness. But to reach that, one must first break free from the belief that suffering alone is proof of meaning. Consider the artist who cannot create unless they are in turmoil. They believe that only heartbreak fuels their art, but this belief is a cage. It sabotages them from exploring creativity through joy, wonder, or curiosity. Their devotion to suffering limits their depth rather than expands it. The hard truth is this: struggle does not guarantee meaning. Sometimes it is just struggle. And peace does not mean shallowness. Peace is the foundation that allows genuine meaning to grow. But if you are addicted to suffering, you will sabotage peace the moment it enters your life. Jung would argue that this is the shadow's trick. It convinces you that you need chaos to feel alive, when in fact you are running from the deeper task of learning how to live fully without the crutch of suffering. The question is whether you will keep mistaking chaos for depth, or finally allow yourself to experience the quiet strength of peace. Number 9. Your ego feeds on control, not success. People often believe the ego craves success, but in truth, the ego does not care whether you succeed or fail. What it craves most is control. And here is the paradox. The ego would rather cling to a failure it can predict than risk an unfamiliar success it cannot fully control. Think of someone who constantly returns to the same self-destructive patterns. They take the same kind of job that keeps them unhappy, or repeat the same unhealthy relationships. On the surface, it looks like weakness. In reality, it is the ego protecting itself. Familiar failure feels safer than uncertain success because it keeps the ego in charge. Success, on the other hand, opens doors the ego cannot script. Carl Jung believed the ego is not the whole self. It is just the part of you that manages daily life, trying to maintain order. But the deeper self, the unconscious, contains far more than the ego can handle. When success invites you to grow beyond old limits, the ego panics. It whispers, "Stay small, stay predictable. It is better to fail on my terms than succeed on terms I cannot control." Philosophy mirrors this idea. Soren Kierkegaard described despair as choosing to be chained to a small self rather than risk becoming the self you might be. The ego thrives in that smallness. It gets to call the shots. But success would demand surrender, humility, and stepping into uncertainty. That is unbearable for the ego. Imagine an athlete who trains hard but chokes in big moments. The failure, though painful, is predictable. It keeps them tied to an identity they know. Success would change everything. New attention, new responsibilities, new risks of falling from a higher place. The ego fears that kind of unpredictability. This is why sabotage happens. The ego convinces you that failure is not so bad as long as it is familiar. What it cannot tolerate is the chaos of change. The hard truth is this: your ego values control more than your growth. Until you recognize this, you will keep choosing predictable failure over liberating success. The challenge is learning to surrender control, to step into success without needing to own every outcome. That surrender terrifies the ego, but it is the only way the deeper self can emerge. Number 10. Your inner critic is a voice you refuse to disown. When people think of failure, they imagine external setbacks, losing a job, a broken relationship, a missed opportunity. But those are rarely what destroys someone. What destroys a person is the relentless voice inside their own mind, the inner critic, the part that whispers again and again that you are not enough. This critic is powerful because it is disguised as truth. You do not recognize it as an intruder. You think it is simply you, describing reality. It says, "You will embarrass yourself," and you believe it. It says, "You do not deserve success," and you agree. The critic is not an objective voice. It is a collection of judgments you absorbed long ago, from parents, teachers, peers, or a culture that measured you harshly. But instead of confronting it, most people adopt it as their own inner authority. Carl Jung believed that what we refuse to face in ourselves gains power over us. The inner critic is a perfect example. It is the part of you that you have not disowned. You treat its words as fact, rather than as fragments of a wounded past. Imagine a child who is constantly told they will never amount to anything. Years later, they excel in school or work, but every time they approach success, the critic rises. You are a fraud. You do not belong here. The tragedy is not that the voice exists. The tragedy is that the adult never stops to question whose voice it really is. They mistake the echo of the past for the truth of the present. Philosophy captures this dilemma as well. Epictetus, the Stoic philosopher, said that people are not disturbed by things, but by the views they take of them. The critic is exactly that, an interpretation masquerading as reality. The key is not to silence the critic through willpower, but to confront it and see it for what it is. A voice that once protected you by keeping you small, but now imprisons you. What destroys you is not failure. What destroys you is living your life under the authority of a voice that was never truly yours. The moment you recognize and disown it, you begin to reclaim your freedom. Number 11. Self-sabotage is often an unconscious rebellion. Many acts of self-sabotage are not about laziness or weakness, they are about rebellion. Deep down, you may be resisting authority figures from your past, still fighting a war that ended years ago. The tragedy is that you do not realize the battlefield now exists only in your mind. Picture a teenager who grows up with strict, controlling parents. Every decision is made for them. They are told what to study, how to behave, even who to befriend. Outwardly, they obey, but inwardly resentment grows. As an adult, when they finally have freedom, the rebellion surfaces in subtle but destructive ways. They avoid responsibility, they abandon goals, or they sabotage promising opportunities. On the surface, it looks like carelessness. In reality, they are still unconsciously saying, "You will not control me." But the authority figure they are resisting is no longer there. They are fighting a ghost. Carl Jung believed that unresolved conflicts with parental figures often sink into the unconscious, shaping behavior long into adulthood. Until these conflicts are confronted, the psyche repeats them through sabotage. The individual mistakes rebellion for freedom. Not realizing it keeps them trapped. Philosophers have written about this pattern too. Nietzsche warned about the spirit of revenge, the endless cycle of defining yourself by opposition. When you live only to resist, you remain chained to the very power you oppose. Psychology shows this in what is called oppositional behavior. Children who grow up under harsh authority often carry that oppositional reflex into adulthood. The problem is that they end up sabotaging themselves far more than the authority they once resented. Think about someone who avoids financial stability because growing up, money was used by their parents as a tool of control. As an adult, they unconsciously reject opportunities to save or grow wealth. They feel like they are rebelling, but in reality, they are only wounding themselves. The painful truth is this: rebellion, when unconscious, is not liberation. It is simply another chain. Until you recognize who you are really rebelling against, you will keep destroying your own path as if punishing someone else. Freedom is not found in sabotage, it is found in consciously ending the war within yourself. Number 12. The fear of wholeness is greater than the fear of failure. Most people think failure is what they fear most, but if you look deeper, you will see something even more unsettling. What many truly fear is becoming whole. Because to step into your full potential means you must give up the excuses, identities, and stories that have carried you for decades. And to the psyche, that feels like death. Think of someone who has always seen themselves as the struggler, the one who never quite makes it. That identity, while painful, becomes familiar. It explains their choices, it attracts sympathy, and it spares them from full responsibility. Now imagine what happens if they actually succeed. If they rise into their full potential, the story they have lived by collapses. The old self must die so a new self can emerge. The unconscious often fights against this transformation. It whispers, "Stay small. Better to fail than to lose who you are." Carl Jung believed individuation, the process of becoming whole, was the most demanding task of life. To integrate all parts of yourself means facing not only your strengths, but also your shadows, wounds, and contradictions. Wholeness requires radical honesty. It means no more blaming the past, no more hiding behind weakness, no more living on half-truths. Many would rather endure repeated failure than walk into that level of exposure. Philosophy echoes this. Søren Kierkegaard described despair as the refusal to become the self you were meant to be. People cling to half-identities because stepping into their true self feels like stepping off a cliff. Consider someone who has always blamed their unhappy childhood for their struggles. That story has become a shield. If they embraced wholeness, they would have to admit, "My past shaped me, but it no longer defines me." That sounds empowering, but it is terrifying too, because the moment they drop the story, there is nothing left to hide behind. Failure feels safer than wholeness, because failure allows you to keep your old identity intact. Wholeness, however, asks for total transformation, and transformation feels like death before it feels like life. The deepest question is this: are you willing to let your old self die so the full self can finally live? Number 13, you sabotage to stay in familiar pain. One of the strangest truths about human nature is that many people are more comfortable with pain than with joy. It is not because joy is undesirable. It is because joy is unknown. And to the unconscious mind, the unknown is far more threatening than the suffering you already understand. Think of someone who has spent years in unhealthy relationships. They complain about being mistreated, yet when someone kind and stable enters their life, they feel uneasy. Instead of leaning into the safety of love, they sabotage it. They pick fights, withdraw, or convince themselves something is wrong. Why? Because the warmth of genuine care feels foreign. The suffering of mistreatment, though painful, feels familiar. Psychologists call this phenomenon the familiarity principle. The mind is drawn to what it recognizes, even if what it recognizes is harmful. Pain that you know feels safer than happiness you have never experienced. Joy carries uncertainty. What if it does not last? What if it gets taken away? For many, it is easier to sabotage joy before it can slip from their hands. Carl Jung observed that the unconscious often clings to old wounds, even protecting them because they are part of one's identity. To step into happiness would mean releasing not only the pain but also the self-image that grew out of it. That can feel like erasing who you are. Philosophically, this is what Kierkegaard called the dizziness of freedom. Joy requires openness to the unknown. Suffering, however, has a map. You already know how to survive it. That makes suffering strangely comfortable. Consider someone who finally lands their dream job. Instead of celebrating, they begin doubting themselves, fearing exposure as an imposter. They may even sabotage their performance until they lose the job. This sounds irrational, but at the unconscious level it makes sense. Losing the job returns them to familiar pain. Keeping it would have forced them into uncharted joy, a territory they have never learned to navigate. The unsettling truth is this: many people are not trapped by pain itself, but by its familiarity. The unconscious believes survival is safer than flourishing. To break the cycle, you must learn to tolerate joy, to stand in unfamiliar happiness without running back to the predictable ground of suffering. That is the real challenge of growth. Number 14. Your sabotage exposes your secret addiction to chaos. Many people imagine addiction as something external: substances, gambling, unhealthy habits. But there is another addiction that hides in plain sight: the addiction to chaos. If your nervous system has been trained to live in conflict, then stillness and order can feel unbearable. And when life starts to calm down, you may unconsciously sabotage it just to stir the storm again. Think of someone who finally gets into a stable relationship after years of turmoil. Instead of relaxing into the peace, they grow restless. They pick unnecessary fights, chase drama, or create distance. It is not that they dislike stability. It is that stability feels alien. Their body is so accustomed to the adrenaline of chaos that peace registers as boredom, even danger. The nervous system interprets calm as unfamiliar and therefore unsafe. Psychology explains this through trauma conditioning. If you grew up in an environment where conflict, shouting, or unpredictability were normal, your brain wires itself to expect that rhythm. Over time, you do not just endure chaos, you need it, you seek it out, you create it. Carl Jung would call this the shadow at work. The parts of you that thrived in conflict do not vanish just because you want peace. They sabotage peace because they feel invisible without the drama that once gave them energy. Philosophers have seen this pattern too. Heraclitus claimed war is the father of all things, suggesting humans grow out of conflict. But if you never move beyond it, you mistake war for life itself. Consider the person who always sabotages financial stability. Each time they save money, they suddenly overspend or take reckless risks. On the surface, it looks irresponsible. But underneath, it is chaos addiction. Financial peace feels suffocating because it lacks the rush of instability. Here is the brutal truth. If your nervous system equates chaos with aliveness, then order feels like death. That is why you may destroy peace as soon as it arrives. Breaking this cycle means retraining your body as much as your mind. You must teach yourself that stillness is not emptiness, and order is not suffocation. It is a higher form of freedom, but you will never taste it until you stop sabotaging calm in order to feed chaos. In final words, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Carl Jung. When we talk about failure, we often frame it as a lack of effort, intelligence, or talent. But that explanation is far too shallow. What truly lies underneath many patterns of failure is not incapability, but sabotage. And sabotage is rarely a conscious act. It is the unconscious mind protecting itself, clinging to familiar roles and rehearsing old wounds. Think about it. Most people do not set out to destroy opportunities or relationships. Yet time and again they find themselves repeating the same cycles. They call it bad luck or weakness. But Jung would insist it is far more complex. The psyche protects its wounds more fiercely than it seeks its freedom. Success, peace, and growth are not just goals. They are threats to the identities and survival strategies we have carried for years. This is why many prefer failure over wholeness. Failure allows you to remain hidden, wrapped in the comfort of the familiar. Wholeness asks you to confront the parts of yourself you have buried, and that confrontation feels like standing naked before the world. The task, then, is not to condemn yourself for sabotage, but to recognize it for what it is. It is your unconscious speaking in actions rather than words. It is fear disguised as caution. It is loyalty to an old self that no longer fits. The real question is not whether you are capable. It is whether you are willing to let the old identity die so the fuller self can live. Because as Jung reminds us, you are not failing. You are sabotaging yourself. And that means the power to stop is already in your hands. Thank you for watching, and see you in another episode.